The night before the competition, Greg, Trey, myself, Chris Cowan got up and talked to all the builders. We showed them a few clips of Olympic athletes and Adidas commercials and things like that and said, why can't this be you?
Today, we're talking with BattleBot's executive producer and showrunner, Aaron Catling, and the bot whisperer himself, Peter Abramson.
On this episode,
Behind the Battle.
Aaron, you've had a long-standing career in the TV industry. Can you tell me how that got started?
Yeah, I was really lucky. I actually started down the path of being a medical scientist, then went and traveled the world. And what I'd always wanted to do was be a writer, and met my lovely wife, and she convinced me to go back to film school. And then next thing you knew it, I ended up working in unscripted TV in Australia and doing shows like Big Brother. And then my wife's an American. She's from upstate New York. Had our first kid, Annabelle. We moved to America. And I was lucky enough to work on the show MasterChef on Fox for a bunch of years as a co-executive producer. And then when the time came, when BattleBots was being rebooted, I was fortunate enough to take some meetings and be the guy chosen to kind of be the showrunner.
We're talking with the one, the only bot whisperer, Peter Abramson. I heard you have quite the history working on TV and movies.
Yeah, somewhat.
Please talk to me about Hellboy. What did you work on?
We built a baby Hellboy that was a full puppet that they ended up scrapping and just doing CG because he could jump around and do things in CG that we couldn't do with the puppet. I worked extensively on the corpse, the guy he carries around that's a half corpse. He pulls out of the graveyard and puts over his shoulder and says, which one am I supposed to go? The really big thing that I spent the most time working on was Rasputin's glove, the big mechanical glove that Rasputin uses to summon Hellboy in the beginning of the film, which has little hatches that open and close and had fluid flowing through little tubes, and this big giant cylinder spun with little valves that sort of popped open and closed, way over budget. But Guillermo says, I don't care.
So you said you kind of got in BattleBots through taking the right meetings and everything, but you said that you had seen it on you'd seen Robot Wars. When you saw it, did you think, man, I want to do something on Robot Wars one day?
It was back when I was still a medical scientist. I was just a backpacker, and I was like, this is awesome. I'm also a massive sports fan, so a lot of what we did with rebooting it for ABC was going, how can we take Americans' popular love of sports and give BattleBots a bit of a dressing that will feel familiar while still introducing and keeping true to the spirit of robot combat. So welcoming, and everyone's as you know, the builders are just the most incredible people with the biggest hearts, and just it's such an open world. You just want people in their living rooms to feel like, I could do that. And you want that little 9-year-old girl to be like, Mom, can we go to the garage and I want to play with a motor. I want to try this. Or the little boy being like, oh no, I don't want to play Fortnite anymore. I want to go try to build a BattleBot. That's the dream, and everything's trying to build us towards that.
How did you get involved with BattleBots?
Years before Robot Wars, Mark Satrakian, Greg Munson, myself all went to high school together. Mark sort of led the way into special effects, which I followed because that's what I wanted to do, was make since age 14. And Mark was doing that too. I was into RC cars, and I had a Clodbuster, which was a big, giant, tired monster truck. And we said, what would be really cool is we mounted some Estes rockets on these things and drove these monster trucks at each other and launched rockets. And they were like, yeah, we'll wear catcher's mitts outfits, full umpire outfits out in the desert, and we'll drive these trucks that have flamethrowers on them and have rockets. I built a little bit of it, and Mark built some of his stuff. And then Mark Thorpe, who worked with Satrakian, called him up and said, I've got this crazy idea, and I want you to be a part of it with me. Could you want to be a partner with me on creating this event, which was going to be Robot Wars 1994? And Satrakian said, I don't really want to be an events organizer, but I will build for you. And so he built the very first master. I flew down to San Francisco to be Mark's pit crew. And we were already, from our earlier goofing around, had came up with the term Team Sinister long before we were at Robot Wars. So that was it. It was Team Sinister. It was Mark Satrakian, Paul Rivera, and myself. And we just were there to help Mark do his thing on 1994. And after that, it was I'm building my own robot. I really hope, in the same way that robotics does for kids in school, that BattleBots inspires new engineers to want to go out and build things. Kids will I want to go build a robot. I want to build a robot with 4 wheels or 6 wheels or treads or, floats or whatever. I want to see that influence and impact on the rest of the world in some way.
Talk to me about how you got into BattleBots.
When I first started meeting about the show, I do a deep dive into the sport, everything that was around, obviously watch the 94 hours of Comedy Central, everything I could find, every special that Greg and Trey could feed me, every bit of tape. And then honestly, the biggest lesson was the very first reboot BattleBots on Mare Island in season 1 in 2015. And so, they were really excited about having the show being rebooted, but they were very trepidatious. I think the whole community was, that they didn't want this to become a reality TV show. The night before the competition, Greg, Trey, myself, Chris Cowan got up and talked to all the builders and tried to give them a pep talk. We showed them a few clips of Olympic athletes and Adidas commercials and things like that, and said, why can't this be you? And let's say what you do is to be celebrated on this level. And that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to make this your Olympics, your Formula One. We're just trying to give people a window into your world, and people will slowly learn it and become experts. We've been trying to expand our palette and get a bit more tech in there, get more things in there for the hardcore fan. And fortunately, our fans embrace it and love it too, as you can tell on all the forums and Reddit and things, so it's really cool. And the sport, as you mentioned, the sport's come so fast, so quickly. It's incredible.
You guys probably know that I've been with the show since its inception, basically all the way back to the Comedy Central days, even before that with Robot Wars. Greg and I have been best friends since 7th grade.
Oh my.
So it goes back a long ways. Greg had said, we're going to do this new show. Do you want to be a part of it? I did a budget and then said, how much is the stipend going to be for a build for robots? Mm-hmm. And the stipend didn't match my budget. And I went, you know what? The last robot nearly killed my marriage, so I'm not going to want to do this again. How about I do something on the production end? And Greg was like, that's great, because we actually need a technical advisor, because none of these people have ever seen robot combat. They don't know what they're looking at totally. They don't understand what's happening in the arena at any one time.
What does your role as showrunner and executive producer mean for BattleBots?
What I always say to people is the showrunner is the one person who is responsible for every frame of television you watch. And so it's my job to deliver that to the network. So whereas Greg and Trey are the stewards of BattleBots, the franchise, the sport, it's on me to deliver the episode to Discovery and make sure it gets there. It's kind of all encompassing.
You're watching all these fights, you have a literal front row seat.
True. Yes.
What's going through your mind as you're watching these fights?
I mean, I know when a robot isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. You can sort of tell and you look over and they're wiggling the stick and the robot isn't doing the thing it's supposed to be doing. Something's going wrong. I know what their strategies were. They've usually told me prior to that. At the entrance to the tunnel, mm-hmm. They can call me before their fight and say, hey, Scorpius might say, we switched to this hammer saw. We were going to use this disc against whoever we're fighting. And that gives me a sense of what they're doing and how they're planning.
Stay tuned for part 2 of our season finale with Aaron and Peter on the next Behind the Battle.